The short answer is that stuff's changed, right? ITIL 3 was released in 2007, and you've got things like cloud computing that was just starting to gain traction as an alternative to data center computing, and there really weren't any established good practices for managing these environments. And that's just one example. But then throw in things like artificial intelligence and machine learning that has really taken off in just the past couple of years. And things like big data, the Internet of Things. There's a lot of stuff in our modern digital world that simply didn't exist when the ITIL standards were published, over a dozen years ago. The other thing ITIL 4 does is provide a holistic picture of service delivery. I mentioned cloud services, but we have things like platform as a service, software as a service, infrastructure as a service. We're dealing more and more with partners and suppliers. So the need for an end-to-end modeling scheme, something that we can use for managing effective service delivery, has grown in importance. And ITIL 4 is offering us a way to do that. Another reason why ITIL 4 came about is because there are other well-established methods of working, and we want to make sure that those methods can integrate with the ITIL framework. I'm thinking of things like governance frameworks, COBIT, PMBOK, other DevOps models like Agile and Lean, and work methods like Scrum and Kanban. All of these things have a home now within ITIL 4. But we didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. ITIL still includes all the best of the previous version. So we didn't have to go home and start rewriting process and procedure documents right away. In fact, most of the good practice information that was around in ITIL 3 that we may have learned is still here in ITIL 4. And a big distinction with ITIL 4 is the creation of value. And the notion of co-creation of value between the customers, the consumers of our services, and the service providers themselves. Whereas ITIL 3 had a much larger focus on the services and the respective outcomes, ITIL 4 really is emphasizing the delivery of value within those outcomes. So moving on to what is new in ITIL 4. Well, there's a lot. There's a lot of new stuff in ITIL 4, but today we're just going to focus on some of the key differences and maybe the 6 items in particular, starting with the 7 guiding principles that represent the core messaging of ITIL and of service management in general. Then we'll look at the 4 dimensions of service management and how ITIL defines a holistic approach to service management. Next, we'll look at what is called the service value system, and it explains the components and activities that an organization can work together as a system to enable the creation of value between the provider and its customers. And then we'll dig a little deeper into the service value system. At its core, we have the service value chain. That's an operating model that defines the key activities required to respond to demand and enable that value creation through creating and managing products and services. We have a little bit of a nomenclature difference, whereas in ITIL 3 we really learned about the processes, and we had 26 process areas, if you recall. In ITIL 4, we're really evolving those processes into what are known as practices. So it's not just the process that we're focusing on, but it's everything around that process to really enable the practices, of which there are now 34. And then lastly, we'll take a quick peek at the certification scheme for ITIL 4 and changes there. So a key concept of ITIL 4 are these guiding principles. And there's 7 of them, as I mentioned. And although these principles are not exclusive to ITIL, they really are essential to effective service management. The first is the focus on value. This is really trying to, as the name indicates, create value for customers of a service. which requires understanding first and foremost who the customer is, how they're going to use the service, and what they expect to get out of it. When we identify those customers and the consumers of these services, as well as all the other stakeholders involved, we can get a clearer picture for what the expectations might be. And it's also necessary to understand our customer's perspective on that value. And we have to be willing to change as circumstances change to define value in any given situation. Sometimes customers' needs evolve, and the definition of value may have to evolve as well. A focus on value also suggests that we need to be aware of the customer experience and continually improve that customer experience so that they can continue to realize value from the service. The next principle is to start where you are, which basically means let's assess our current situation before proceeding. It asks, what do we already have in front of us? What can we leverage? Instead of starting from scratch, let's analyze the current state to see what we might be able to reuse. Do we have any lessons learned? What are some of the experiences other teams have had? Then let's use that information to identify what might be helpful in delivering value. The next guiding principle is to progress iteratively with feedback. And some of you might instantly recognize this from other frameworks such as Agile. And it's really the notion that we want to break down our initiatives into smaller, more manageable components so that we can get input and feedback more readily and more quickly, and reduce the likelihood that in the end, that deliverable doesn't meet with our customers' expectations. This is a departure from the classic waterfall approach to project management, and as I mentioned, adopts Agile principles used successfully in the software development lifecycle. So ITIL is embracing this as a fundamental guiding principle to effective service management. Another important principle is collaborate and promote visibility. One of the biggest challenges facing organizations is their tendency to work in silos. This principle aims at breaking down those barriers and busting out of those silos by encouraging this collaboration. We want to avoid the confusion that arises when the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. This collaboration can also foster creativity and potentially offer new insights that teams working in those traditional silos might not have otherwise considered, which provides even more value to the product or the service being developed. And then we want to promote visibility. We want to establish trust between teams, because in that trust, that's where we're going to feel free to express our ideas and share in that collaborative process. It's also important to identify all the various stakeholders to know with whom we need to establish that visibility and transparency, and with whom that collaboration needs to occur. The next guiding principle is to think and work holistically, which simply means let's work together in a more integrated way. If everybody can understand that they're part of a bigger, clearly stated goal, and keep in mind the fundamental focus on value that we're trying to deliver, it's going to guide the production of successful outcomes. Next is to keep it simple and practical. This means let's simplify complex work methods. We want to identify and eliminate the processes, services, actions, metrics, things that basically aren't adding value to the outcome. This is also referred to as outcome-based thinking. And the last guiding principle is to optimize and automate. ITIL does provide specific guidance on optimization, things like understanding and agreeing on proposed optimizations, assessing the current state, identifying the future state, ensuring that the optimization has the right level of stakeholder engagement and commitment, executing improvements iteratively, borrowing from one of our guiding principles, constantly using metrics and other feedback to check that progress, and then monitoring the impact of those optimizations to identify additional opportunities. Uh, Benefits of automation are pretty commonly known, but I'll list off a few anyway. We've got improvement to availability of services, improved productivity across the board of our human resources as well as our products and services, the reduction of costs, better performance, better reliability. The list goes on and on. So together, these guiding principles are really the cornerstone of effective service management, and it's the message that ITIL 4 is really hoping to carry forward and really institute these as almost common values amongst service providers within your organization. The next key concept within ITIL 4, and this isn't a new concept as much as I think they've essentially rebranded it, are what they're being called the 4 dimensions. And it's basically the 4 things that you want to consider and think about whenever you're developing products and services or potential improvements to those products and services throughout the entire service development, delivery, and support lifecycle. In version 3, you might be familiar with what were called the 4 Ps, and it was people, process, products, and partners. And those were essentially the 4 pillars of service management. And now we have 4 dimensions of service management. But in general, it's largely similar, with a focus first and foremost on the organizations and people. And really, people are at the heart of any service management strategy. So we need to take things into consideration like organizational structure with defined roles and responsibilities. Excuse me, we want to know what the systems of authority are, communication models, things like that. Another aspect would be organizational culture. As I mentioned, we had the guiding principles that we would like to ingrain in that organizational culture. So we have shared beliefs and values, attitudes, the written and unwritten rules of an organization all come into play. Making sure that we've got common organizational objectives, which need to be clearly defined so that everybody understands what we're working towards and thinking holistically as per that guiding principle, as well as things like skills and competencies of our individual resources. It's important for people to understand their role and specialization, of course, but they need to know the role and specializations of others. So updating the communication plan in order to have effective collaboration and transparency among individuals is key. The other dimension to defining products and services and managing them effectively is information and technology. Questions like what information will the services manage? Ultimately, information is the primary way of delivering value to customers, so we need to understand what that information is. What supporting information might be required? What information might be required to provide to other services that are dependent on it? And really understanding the information architecture used by the services is critical. How will we protect this information, manage it, archive it, dispose of it, etc.? We've got regulations, security risks. All of these things need to be considered as part of the decision-making process. And then the technology aspect to this dimension. Questions like, is the technology compatible with the existing architecture, or will the technology products be used by the organization and its stakeholders? Will they work together? How do emerging technologies influence this service? Will this technology continue to be viable for the foreseeable future? So you get the question. So you've got to have to ask these types of questions whenever we're making decisions around what to develop, how to develop it, and how to improve it. I mentioned at the start, the reliance on partners and suppliers is growing, and that's the third dimension. They're involved in just about every phase of product development or service management, from design, development, deployment, delivery support, continual improvement. Making sure that you've got healthy relationships with your partners and suppliers. It's necessary for companies and service organizations to deliver that service's value that our customers expect. And then the fourth dimension, the value streams and processes. So ITIL 4 provides a model known as the ITIL service value chain, which we'll discuss in a moment. But this model can follow different paths and patterns. And the patterns within the value chain are called value streams. And some of you might recognize that this term is borrowed from the Lean Agile framework. So the value stream is the series of steps that an organization uses to create and deliver products and services to customers, whereas a process is the set of activities that transform defined inputs into defined outputs. The process defines the sequence of actions and their dependencies. And you may have noticed the ring around these four dimensions are external factors. External factors are based on the PESTLE model. So we've got political, economic, social, technological, legal, environmental. But it's things like, from political perspective, government policy, overseas regional stability, foreign trade policy, labor laws, etc. All in some way, shape, or form influence one or multiple of these dimensions. Economic factors such as growth and interest rates and exchange rates and inflation. Social factors such as, these millennials that are getting older, right? Age distribution, health consciousness, emerging trends. Technological factors. They're coming out with new ways to produce and distribute goods and services all the time. All of these things play a part in how we define and how we manage and deliver our services. So I mentioned briefly the service value system. This explains how the components and activities of the organization all work together in order to produce that value at the end of the day associated with these outcomes. On the left, we can see the inputs. On the right, the expected outcomes. And down the middle, you see the components of the service value system. Our inputs are opportunity and demand. So we've got options or possibilities that add value for stakeholders or the desire for products and services, both internally and externally. The value is the perceived benefit or usefulness of the service. And the components of the service value system itself are the guiding principles that we discussed, governance, the means by which an organization is directed and controlled. So ITIL is, again, including provisions for things now, like governance models such as COBIT or PMBOK. And then we've got the service value chain at the heart. And this is the set of activities performed by an organization to deliver a valuable product or service to its customers. The practices, in ITIL version 3, they were known as processes, but our practices are the set of organizational resources designed to perform work or accomplish some objective. Examples of this could be like a service desk or a change advisory board. And then continual improvement, a recurring activity to ensure that the organization's performance is continually meeting stakeholders' expectations. And just to summarize, we've got this service value system. It's the framework for developing supporting services to ultimately provide value. At the heart of that service value system is what's known as the service value chain. That's the central component. Now, this is an operating model that defines the key activities required to address those opportunities and demands and enable the creation of that value through the development and management of products and services. There's 6 key value chain activities: plan, improve, engage, design and transition, obtain, build, deliver, and support. Plan helps to ensure that there's a shared understanding of the vision, current state, and the direction for improvement for all products and services provided by the organization. The purpose of improve is to ensure continual improvement of products and services. The practices across all value chain activities and the 4 dimensions of service management. And if you haven't noticed yet, continual improvement is a key theme in ITIL 4. It was a pretty key theme in ITIL 3, but already we've seen in the service value system, there's a notion for improvement. In the service value chain, there is a formal step for improvement. And then there's actually a practice of continual improvement, which is shown on the next slide. The engage activity is where we develop a good understanding of our stakeholders and their needs. We establish transparency, communication, set the foundation for continued engagement and a good relationship with those stakeholders. The design and transition activity makes sure that the products and services are continually meeting stakeholder expectations for things like quality, costs, time to market. The obtain and build activity makes sure that the components that are needed by a product and service are available when and where they are needed, and that they meet the agreed specifications. Deliver and support ensures that services are delivered and supported according to the agreed service level commitments and continue to meet those stakeholder expectations. So to summarize the service value chain, it's the activities necessary to develop, deliver, support the services that we provide. Each service has one or more value streams associated with them and is made up of the activities and practices needed for that particular service. Different value streams can and will have different activities and practices. The service value chain is the framework that ensures value is consistently delivered to customers and stakeholders. So for a moment, we'll look at some of the differences, and I mentioned we've evolved the notion of processes to practices, and there are some differences here. I already mentioned that there were 26 processes, and some of the feedback from ITIL 3 that the authors received was that there might be too many processes. So there was a concerted effort to reduce or consolidate the number of processes, and they wound up with 34 practices. so eight more than the original consolidated list. But you do see that there are new things that have been added in to version 4, such as organizational change management, workforce and talent management, business analysis, infrastructure and platform management. And then they did things like break apart some other process areas. As an example, release and deployment management are now separate entities. You've got release management and you've got deployment management. Service asset and configuration management have been split into IT asset management and service configuration management. Another notable difference is things like the service desk, which, if you remember from ITIL 3, was a function of an organization. It's now a practice. So it's not just the processes that they manage, it's the technologies, the people involved. All of that is a formal service desk practice. And then some other smaller changes. Things like measurement and reporting have been elevated to a general management practice. Change management has now been rebranded as change control, which will be a big difference for a lot of folks. And then application development has become software development and management. The items that are underlined and in bold are covered in more detail in ITIL 4 foundation training. And then lastly, the certification scheme has changed slightly for version 4. Foundation is still the same. ITIL Foundation is ITIL Foundation. But we used to have ITIL practitioner certifications, which have now been moved to this layer at the middle, where we have the notions of ITIL specialists, ITIL strategist, and ITIL leader. You can see where the ITIL managing professional consists of those 3 specialist designations as well as the ITIL strategist. And the parallel for an ITIL expert, if you were an expert in version 3, would be the transition to the ITIL managing professional certificate. There is a bridge program in development to transition from that ITIL expert into the ITIL managing professional. In order to become an ITIL master, you have to have both the managing professional and strategic leader designations. And then there's a final class to reach that ITIL master certification. So if anybody has any more questions or wants any follow-up, please feel free to reach out to myself, Ezra Wise, or give us a call at any of the contact locations that you see below. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me today. I do want to remind people that we are having a ITIL 4 Foundation certification class in Vienna, Virginia, upcoming this June 4th through 6th. So feel free to reach out and contact us for any of that information.